Thank you very much for being here today. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Anurag Danda from India visiting us on one of our unique projects that we have set up with the National Science Foundation. So I will give a brief introduction to Dr. Danda, and then I'll talk about the project that we are having him over for. So Dr. Danda is a social anthropologist with a particular interest in the practice of sustainable development. He has implemented projects in rural and peri-urban areas across sectors spanning aquaculture and agriculture, water and energy access, rural transportation, and conservation. Common to all these projects has been the concept of sustainability. His fieldwork experience is mostly in the Ganga Delta region and basin area and spans over 27 years. So Dr. Danda and I met in 2020 in the midst of COVID-19 when it was at its peak. And that was a disaster. And amidst that disaster, there was a Category 5 cyclone that hit the Bay of Bengal, especially the Sundarbans region on May 20, 2020. That was a turning point for me in my career because I felt that the world was coming to an end. That's when I went full-fledged into disaster resilience. I'm a chemical engineer by training, but that's where we felt like there is a lot more that we can do. And that's where I went into disaster resilience for the first time. Dr. Danda and me were connected by the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industries. It's the largest chamber of commerce in India. And we started discussions on what can we do in terms of disaster resilience in that part of the world. But when we started looking at it, we had similar issues in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Gulf Coast. So that's when we put together a team, which I call the Direfuse team, Disaster Resilient Food, Energy, Water Systems. And since then, I have probably written over 30 proposals. Some of them have been funded. Some of them are on their way to getting funding. But essentially, what we have started is the focus on technology-based solutions for disaster resilience. And that's where Dr. Danda has been working from the World Wildlife Fund perspective and Observer Research Foundation perspective in India to bring some of those solutions into implementation. And that's probably something that he's going to discuss with us today. But apart from that, Dr. Danda has worked on the ground and has a lot of ground level experiences that we try to bring into our research areas and understand that from these deeper perspectives. So I'm looking forward to Dr. Danda's presentation. Welcome to Texas. Welcome to Texas A&M University. Hopefully this is going to be the first of many of your visits, and hopefully we'll be able to have a great collaboration in the future. Thank you very much.
Good morning to those who are here. I don't know where people have logged in from, so appropriate greetings to those. I am guessing some of my countrymen and colleagues might have also logged in, so good evening to them. I must start with a word of gratitude to Dr. Devlina Singupta. I've been enjoying her hospitality for the last 2 days and her families. I am grateful to you, Dr. Plotkin, to Texas Sea Grant. Colleagues from Texas Sea Grant were very gracious, very kind yesterday to give me the exposure to oyster farms, how it is processed. It was a fairly long day, but I think it was time well spent. So thank you, everybody, and those who have taken time to be here in person and those who have registered. Dr. Sengupta talked about this project where we started collaborating. And it's on disasters. And now that her focus is on coastal resilience, I will talk and restrict myself to disaster resilience, because the moment we say resilience, it has to be to something, right? Resilience to something. So here it is resilience to disasters. Some places are, of course, more prone to disasters than others. We know disasters are a function of multiple things. It's an hazardous event, which could be a rapid onset event, like a storm. It could be a very gradual process, like erosion, subsidence, which culminate in a disaster. So we need an event or a process. We need exposure to that event or a process. And we also depends on how well equipped we are to deal with the situation. That's the capacity part of it. So it's a function of these three things. And it could also be other things, but these are the three main things that are that decide whether an event or a process will lead to a disaster or not. And there are certain places that are more prone to disasters. There are certain occupations, certain population groups that are more affected by disasters than others. So the place that I come from is the very last bit of the Ganga Delta. This place is called the Sundarbans, and it inherently is disaster prone. So, if I were to speak in the first person for the Sundarbans, the way I try and visualize it is, if I am disaster prone, I have to ask myself the questions: who am I? Where am I? And what is it that I do? So who am I? Is I am the Ganges Delta. I am the largest mangrove forest. So largest mangrove delta anywhere in the world, right? So this is an image or a map from the 19th century. The forest is, of course, much smaller than what it is. So that, as you can see, the green line, then it is the brown line or the orange line, and then it is the red line. So the forest has actually shrunk. So it is less than half of what it used to be in, say, the 1830s. So you can see in 1776, and forgive my metric system, I know you guys are used to the imperial system, but now I'm too old to do that. In my first lecture in the United States, I could rattle off imperial system figures like this. I'm no longer as young. So 20,000 square kilometers in 1776, and in 1954, it was 9,000 square kilometers. So less than half of what it used to be. And this is spread across what is now India and Bangladesh. The larger part is in Bangladesh and the smaller part is in India. Does it make the system or the place vulnerable? Not necessarily. So this is the location. I will talk and restrict myself to the Indian part of the Sundarbans because that is where I work. It's not that I do not go to Bangladesh, but because I'm part of WWF India, I cannot directly work in Bangladesh. And so all of my field experience is from the Indian side. So when I say, who am I am this last bit of the Delta. I am the mangrove forest. And I am located in a place that is prone to storms, right? These are all these storms between 1985 and 2005. And there is a color difference that you can see. If it is lighter blue, it is less intense. If it is orange and yellow, it is more intense. the number of storms globally haven't really increased much, but that color coding has changed. So the 20 years since 2005, you would see less blue than what you see on this particular map, right? So I am located in a geography, as you can see, is this part, which is fairly given to storm strikes. So storm hits are a way of life. What is it that I do? And so as you can see, this is the Indian subcontinent. This is, oops, I don't know. I can't seem to find my cursor. Nevertheless, I can point it out here for the benefit of those of you who are here. So this is the bit that we are talking about. This is between India and Bangladesh. And given that this is the geography, this is how I visualize it. It is connected to the Himalayan system, which is the upper part of the sand clock. And it is connected to the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean, which is the lower part of the sand clock. The Sundarbans is the narrow, I don't know what you call it, whatever it is. Yeah. So when I am trying to look for solutions, when I am trying to look for resilience to disasters in the Sundarbans, I can't be addressing the challenges well enough if I am not looking at what's happening in the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. I can't be addressing challenges if I'm not looking at what's happening in the Himalayas. Unfortunately, this is not how we get to look at things. We look at problems and try and find solutions in situ. And that's where the struggle is. We lose out on this connectedness of things, and we think, oh, if it is a problem in the Sundarbans, we'll try and find it and fix it there. That's not always possible. What is it that I do? I host a lot of people. Each of these is a village cluster. In India, it's called a panchayat, which comprises of a few villages. And the panchayat demographics are such that in West Bengal, it is about between 20 and 25,000 people per cluster, right? So I'm home to more than 7 million people in Bangladesh and in India. I am home to the largest contiguous mangrove patch. And this mangrove patch is unlike any other in the world. This is the only mangrove tiger habitat. You can see tigers in the swamps. You can see tigers on the beaches. Nowhere else. So and the diversity of mangrove is also unlike any other place. And of course, it harbors various other species. It plays host to migratory birds. There are aquatic species. On the flyer, you might have seen that there is a face of a tiger, which essentially represents the biodiversity of the Sundarbans. It has various other creatures that all make up the face of the tiger. And this place, the Sundarbans, is besides being home to tigers, humans, and this is one of the most densely populated rural areas anywhere in the world. Just to be able to compare and think in terms of scale, the United States has a population density of 35 people per square kilometer. And mind you, this is the third largest demographic country in the world. India, the second largest demographic country in the world, maybe number one next year, has 450 people roughly per square kilometer. That's a lot of people, very high density. These West Bengal, the state of West Bengal, which is amongst the smaller geographical units within India, has 900 people per square kilometer. That's twice as much of what the average figure is in India. In the Sundarbans, on the Indian side, it's 1,200 people per square kilometer. 1,200. It's a mind-blowing amount of people, right? So when I say 7.5 million people, of this, 5 million is on the Indian side, which is actually the smaller side. If you see, this is the international border. This is the smaller one. And of course, the Bangladesh side is bigger, both in terms of natural area. All the green, yellow, red that you see are the natural areas, tiger habitat, and various other species. So more people, more densely packed. And therefore, the challenges on the Indian side are many times more than what they are on the Bangladesh side. Not that Bangladesh isn't facing challenges, but it's just that it affects or impacts a larger number of people on the Indian side. So to me, this is like the miner's cannery. If we can find solutions here, they will probably work in most of the places with similar challenges. So this is the sandbox, so to say. And the project that Dr. Deblina conceived allowed us to exchange ideas. It does not have the mechanism to fund for these activities, but fortunately, I've been able to garner resources within the WWF to try and work some of those out. I'll come to them a little later. Now, despite the fact that it has about 7.5 million people, it is not really fond of people. It does not want people to be there. This place is not kind to people and built up systems. This is a place that is quite dynamic. So every time humans want to try and settle down, the system resists. The system brings it down like this. You don't need a storm to bring it down. It's the uneven subsidence that causes it. It's the erosion that causes it. It's unkind to people. You don't need a storm for this. This is not storm damage. This is erosion. And it is not only personal homes, it is also institutional buildings, hospitals, schools, police stations that disappear. It was there until yesterday, no longer there today. So it's not very accommodating, so to say. But humans have been around in various waves, so to say, in the Sundarbans for a fairly long time. This structure is from the 10th century and is still standing. So all the 7.5 million people I talked about, all the village clusters that I showed on that previous map, those are legacy of the colonial administration in that part of the world. So the population that we see in the Sundarbans is a continuation of the settlements brought about by the colonial administration. It's not the population that erected this in the 10th century. We don't know where that population is. So there have been waves of settlements in the Sundarbans, and the system has driven them out from time to time. This structure was only found when the forest was being cleared. The mangrove forest was being cleared. I said in 1776, it was about 20,000 square kilometers. By the middle of the last century, it was 9,000 square kilometers. So a lot of these structures were discovered at the time. what is now the natural area in Bangladesh and in India, there are still structures, maybe not as well kept as this. They are in different states of ruin, but you still know that there was a civilization at that particular location. So that's all gone, right? So this is just a information that this is a temple type, a kind of temple that would also be seen in parts of Odisha, Bhubaneswar in particular. Bhubaneswar is, of course, a new city, but in and around that place, so a very similar terracotta structure are to be found in different parts of India in the immediate neighborhood. Now, why is this place? Oh, before I move into this, as I said, the Sundarbans is not only host to a lot of biodiversity and people, it also, because it's a mangrove ecosystem, it also sucks out carbon from the atmosphere. Mangrove ecosystems is the second most natural efficient system so far as carbon sequestration is concerned, next only to the seagrass ecosystem. No terrestrial system compares with what a mangrove ecosystem can do so far as trying to mitigate climate change. It is also the nursery for the Bay of Bengal fishery. So fishermen from as far as Thailand until Sri Lanka are all beneficiaries of the nursery role that the Sundarbans plays. Much of the commercial species that are targeted by fishermen from Thailand until Sri Lanka and everything in between spend a part of their life stage in the Sundarbans. So Sundarbans plays multiple roles, right? And is this place inherently prone to the disasters? Yes, of course it is. It's a very new delta. And when I said it's part of the Ganga Delta, I don't know if you noticed, it is geologically very young. On the Indian side, the oldest part is about 5,000 years old. Just 5,000 years. So the delta is still settling. And human action taking groundwater out does not help. Fortunately, that's all we are taking out. There was a proposal to also scout for oil and gas in that area. Fortunately, that did not go through. I saw a number of pumps yesterday, by the way, that were not in operation at the time, but the drills and the installation that would pump out oil, I saw many of those. That's not happening. Now, because of global warming, the projected temperature rise is actually quite high. We are already more than 1.1 degrees centigrade warmer with reference to the time of the onset of the Industrial Revolution. And when it is warmer, the storms are more intense. So the damage potential of the storms are that much higher. So we are dealing with more intense storms. We are dealing with inundation. Fairly soon, this is what we will see. It's maybe a decade or two away. So unless we intervene and effectively manage that space, we will lose the terrestrial component of the ecosystem. We will lose homes and villages. Out of the 1,064 villages on the Indian side, comprising of 190 panchayats, which is the cluster of villages, there are several that you will see on the map, but in reality, they don't exist. In the census records of India, they are shown as depopulated, which to my mind is, of course, a misnomer because it's not been depopulated, it just doesn't exist. And there are at least 7 of those. 7 villages, as per the census records, are depopulated, but in reality, they don't exist. So this is what we are likely to see. Now, this is a projection that by 2050, this is the land that will be below the tide line. This is, I mean, the places where I was taken yesterday, I asked what's the tidal amplitude, and colleagues from Texas Seagrant said, oh, it could be a few inches to a few feet. I am dealing with a system that witnesses few meters every day. And that range during dry winter months to the monsoon months is between 3 meters and 5 meters. And if you have a storm surge on top of that, not all storms are equally damaging. Storms do us harm in two ways. It could be either harm because of the high speed wind, or it could be because of the wall of water that comes in. So it could be water damage, it could be wind damage, or it could be both. So the cyclonic storm incident that Dr. Devlina mentioned was one of those where it struck during high tide. And therefore the damage, water damage, was much more intense, but the region has seen more intense storms, but it did not coincide with the high water level at the time. And therefore it was restricted mostly to wind damage rather than water damage, right? I'll just show you, try and show you a video clip. Yeah. So this is what you see after a storm has struck. All of this is now under salt water. The agriculture that is practiced in the Sundarbans is obviously freshwater. All of this is rendered useless for years to come. For years, it's not a matter of a season or two. Now, it displaces people physically, because if this place is no longer productive, you can't make a living there, and therefore people move out. But it also changes the landscape. Now, as you can see that part of that island will no longer be within the island, but outside, where high tide and low tide will play out twice every day. So you can't really do anything there. So people are occupationally displaced. People are physically displaced. This displacement has a cost. In South Asia, where most of the occupations are traditional in rural areas, people have known only that thing for generations. So somebody who's been a farmer for generations now has no land to till, is an occupationally displaced person and struggles to find an alternative way of making a living. And therefore, migration of able-bodied people from the Sundarbans is very common. So when I say there are 5 million people, if you were to take a head count, you will probably only count 3 million. 2 million are not to be found in the Sundarbans, except when it's time to vote. When it is time to vote, they're all there, because it's a right that they do not want to give up. And in India, you can't vote wherever you are. You have to be, it's like you have to be declared normally resident of a certain place. So if you are declared as a normally resident of West Bengal and you happen to be in Maharashtra, you can't vote in Maharashtra. You have to come back to Bengal to vote. So voting is the time, irrespective of the level. It could be a parliamentary seat, which is the highest level, or it could be the panchayat level, which is the lowest. That's when you will see people coming in. So a lot of people move back and forth. When COVID struck, people were either stuck at their places where they went to work, and coming back was a challenge, or if they did manage to get here, they were stuck here. And then the storm struck. So we had cascading impacts of disasters. It was not one disaster we were dealing with, but multiple disasters. Now, unless we build resilience to disasters, life will get disrupted every now and then. Now, if life gets disrupted every now and then, the development trajectory cannot be pursued. Right. So,
Question.
yes.
So if all those areas, that are marked in red go underwater, how many people would have to move in another location?
Okay. Now, what you are seeing here is this is underwater during high tide,
Right.
right? So this is not permanent submergence. In any case, answering to your question as to how many people are to move over the next foreseeable future, we are looking at least 1.5 million. These are vulnerable areas. These are more low-lying. In fact, the Mount Everest in the Sundarbans is 7 meters high. The average elevation is only about 2 to 3 meters. There are locations that are below sea level. So in the immediate foreseeable future, we are looking about 1.5 million people having to move from the Indian part of the Sundarbans. Bangladesh is actually handling this much more smartly than West Bengal and India. Bangladesh already has projects in the second phase where they are upgrading their cities. They've targeted 11 cities to be upgraded not only in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of opportunities for people who perforce have to move out of the Sundarbans region. So that means, opportunities for acquiring skills, accessing credit that is cheap, acceptance by the society that is receiving this population. So they are already into the second phase of such a project. And people are already moving, and therefore the population density on the Bangladesh side is actually declining. Whereas on the Indian side, it is still on the rise. We do not have a system that will pull people out for good. It is pulling people out on a more season-to-season basis. So the other challenge that we are facing, this is a delta, this is Ganga Delta, as I said. The Ganga-Brahmaputra system is the second largest hydrological system. It brings enormous amounts of water and silt, and that's how the delta got built in the first place. Now, all these boxes that you see are disruptions on that system, and this is just north of the Sundarbans. So that means this is the river we are talking about, which is no longer the mainstream of the Ganga River. This is called River Hooghly. These are distributaries of River Hooghly. That means these places are no longer receiving fresh water and silt during non-monsoon months. So the delta building process is not keeping up with sea level rise. So in effect, the tidal prism is now moving much further inland than was the case earlier. So it is not only the Sundarbans region that is being affected, it is the much further inland areas that now experiencing brackish water that they had not. All of these red dots that you see are the tributaries to the Hooghly that have all been blocked, intervened, water diverted. These are from the Chotanagpur Plateau. This is not from the Ganges Basin. So the flow of water and silt to the Indian side of the system is now much reduced. And interestingly, this is the only water course that still brings in fresh water. And that too thanks to an engineering intervention called the Farakka Barrage, much further north, which is a bone of contention between Bangladesh, and India. And we have a treaty between the two countries governing the share of water during dry season that will come up for renewal in 2026. Now, in the absence of the Farka barrage, this river would not be perennial. So sustaining the municipal areas that are adjoining the city of Calcutta would become a challenge. Ironically, what we've done, we have freshwater flow here, but we have no natural areas. We have settlements until the very end. We have natural areas on this side, but we do not have freshwater flow. So it is not only humans who are struggling because of the interventions, it is also the biodiversity, flora and fauna. Flora more than fauna. So challenges are multiple. And therefore, this place is so much disaster prone, so to say. As I said, it is a function of things. Who am I? Where am I? What is it that I do? And these are what that are showing. And on top of that, we have this pollution outfall from the city of Calcutta. But mangroves are great filters. So the water that it receives and the water that gets released into the bay are of very different quality. Essentially, there are parts of the Sundarbans where the fish should not be consumed, but in India, everything gets consumed. That's another issue. But this is not the pollution you want to deal with in your food sources, right? But that's what it is. We also have spills like this. There is riverine traffic between India and Bangladesh. And these are not very modern vessels, quite rudimentary and not very well kept. So there are times when they either break, they leak, and then we have, small oil spills. These are fairly small vessels. So the damage is localized, but the damage persists because it's a tidal system. It's not a flowing system that will go away. Then we have these published papers from various sources. This one in particular says projected changes in the area of the Sundarban mangrove forest in Bangladesh due to sea level rise by the end of the century. Their conclusion is, and this is one of the very core group of scientists in Bangladesh and in India, so I do not doubt their work. Their conclusion is that it is erosion more than sea level rise that will cause problems until 2100 at least. So we should find ways to deal with erosion. And as you can see, different colored lines, these are the areas that have eroded. Their region is experiencing net land loss. Lighter green areas here are of course accretion, new land that has built up. But if you look at it, the natural area is losing and it is coming up in the human inhabited areas. So for the natural ecosystem, it's a net loss. And just because it is coming up in human inhabited areas doesn't mean humans can put it to use. By definition, and we call them chore land that comes up through accretion, is that forest land. So humans can put it to use. So even if it has come up here and you have human settlement here, they can't put it to use. Unlike the upper reaches of the river. If we go to Jharkhand and Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and all of those areas, shorelands are formed during low water levels. So we are looking at the rate of erosion. Look at this from 1900 to 424. This is the period. This is the amount of land we had at the time. This is what we had now. So from 12,600, we are down to 12,100 square kilometers of land. So there is net land loss, which means it displaces people, which is not only the natural area that gets eroded, it is also the human inhabited areas that also get eroded. This is just the Indian side. And if you look at some of these islands that are inhabited, I am currently working on this particular island where the last village is no longer there. It just does not exist. And as I said, the census record says depopulated. There are villages on this island, which is the largest one. There are 3 villages that don't exist anymore. And it has, and as I said, each village is about 5,000 people. So every time a village disappears, 5,000 people are rendered homeless. There is no mechanism in the Indian system or the system in West Bengal where loss of this nature is made good through some other state-supported process. It just doesn't there. If it is my loss, it's my loss. This is again one of the islands, as I said, one of the last ones where we are trying to work. This is an idea that has cropped up through the discussions in case of this project that Dr. Devlina conceived. And in that project, we have a few focus areas: food, energy, water, and I've also added the natural system because working in WWF for the natural area, it is only fair that I do it, right? So this is a human inhabited area, as you see. This is an embankment that protects. This area experiences tide twice a day. This is prone to erosion. There is no natural vegetation here. You actually see remnants of the embankment when it was here. So if this place remains barren, this will move further in, right? Displacing these agricultural areas, these homes, and so on and so forth. So we have started intervening a very low-tech stuff. What we have done is we've started placing earthen rings. These earthen rings are meant to trap silt, right? If this stays, it starts attracting mangrove plants. So if we have mangrove plants taking root in this space, the embankment behind then has a protection, right? So when I'm looking at water, I'm looking at food, I'm looking at energy, unless my island is there, none of this is going to work, right? So as you can see, some of them have started sprouting all on their own. I have a little clip to show. So see, as you can see, these are rings, earthen rings, terracotta rings, quite fragile. But the reason why we are using these rings is that they will get assimilated within the ecosystem as they degrade. These rings are usually meant to line dug wells, either for water or for septic tank purposes. So we are repurposing these rings. And the idea is silt will get deposited here over a period of time. Mangroves will take root, provide protection to, and as you can see, it already works as a breaker, right? It has already experienced a couple of low pressure systems. We had no clue whether it would survive or not survive. We installed these in the month of May. They're still around. And now what we're trying to do is also bring in plants. And to be able to study whether these plants are doing any better, we also are creating a control site where we don't have these rings. If the plants do survive at both the locations, then we know, oh, we don't need to put the rings. We need to do something different. But if those plants disappear and these ones remain, then we know these things work. So the village women are helping us put plants into these. And the idea is that if these plants and this structure survives until October of next year, we are good to get into this, the one that I went to see yesterday. I saw sacks of oyster being harvested and brought in and processed. If I can create an oyster reef, so I have the second line of defense. In fact, this would then be the first line of defense. The mangrove would be the second line of defense. And then I have the earthen embankment as the third line of defense. So probably I can deal with erosion in a very low-tech manner. It doesn't need hard engineering. Right? As of now, that place is barren. As of now, it does not support mangrove plants at all, any vegetation for that matter. So this is one of the things. The other thing is this. Many of our people are landless. They don't even have a pond to grow fish. So what we're trying to do is create these floating structures so that people who do not have land, so here we are trying to address food. And for Bengalis, life without fish is no life. It's a miserable life. So fish has to be there in the diet. This particular structure, this is not ours. This is from the university that deals with animal and fishery sciences. They've had this structure in place for 3 years in the Sundarbans, and it has survived 4 cyclonic storms. So we know that this is resilient. So we are trying to look at the economics of this. This structure is obviously an expensive thing to do. We are trying to figure out how this can be supported, whether investors would be willing to bring in money. We figured that out that the produce from these farms, floating farms, will then have to fetch a price many times higher than what the current market supports. So we can't be selling fish to Bengalis. We will have to process this fish in some form and make it pet food. Now, Bengalis might get offended, including Dr. Sengupta, you are feeding dogs and cats and not the Bengalis. But if I sell pet food, I get more money than selling it as raw fish for human consumption. So we are now in the process of trying to figure out as to what would be the best mix. And it is just not one intervention. It's the entire thing. I'll have to figure out how can I put energy to good use in terms of not only processing, but also refrigeration. So I will have to put energy to multiple uses that are not being done at this point in time. Energy is more of a consumptive thing at this point rather than a productive thing. So this is another image. This is actually quite nice. I mean, I'm quite convinced that this will work. All we have to do is figure out the economics of this operation and at what price of the produce will be able to sustain this. The other thing that we are trying to do, again, dealing with the food and the water system, is because we have very clear cyclonic storm seasons, we are trying to encourage agriculture outside those seasons. But these are also the dry winter months. That means whatever agriculture we practice during dry winter months will have to be more water efficient. It will have to be more energy efficient. So we are trying to, and land holding in the Sundarbans is fairly small. I mean, you can't even imagine that that's a holding, the smallness of that holding. So we are trying to create these clusters of at least 1 hectare or thereabouts. And it might mean that there are 4 or 5 farmers within that cluster. Once they form this cluster and agree to cultivate only one kind of crop, if there are 5 farmers in this cluster, they can't be doing 5 different things. If they agree to do the same thing, then we can bring in satellite-based irrigation intelligence, which will then tell us how to use water efficiently. So this is another thing where we are trying to address the challenges that that project identified through an intervention like this. we are repurposing all of our solar energy installations, all of them. Obviously not the streetlight ones, we are leaving them alone. But if you look at this particular island, we have these solar power stations that were installed when these villages or islands did not have grid electricity. So they were meant to provide lighting and basic connection to the TV and all of that. But now all of these villages have received grid electricity, and these assets operational, but are no longer useful. So we are repurposing each of these installations to not only make them productive, but to also contribute to disaster resilience. For example, 2 of our solar power stations, as I speak, are undergoing transformation into becoming water plants. When I say water plants, packaged water. One of them will draw from groundwater, the other one will draw from surface water. During normal times, this enterprise will sell water to anybody who is willing to buy. And buying water has now become aspirational, even in the villages. And it's also good, it's good quality water. And therefore, the enterprise will sell water. But the moment there is early warning issued, the enterprise will ensure that everybody who's a member of this has 3 days of water autonomy for free. So now, currently, people have to bring in fresh water from outside, and these people are struggling till that help arrives. So one of the ideas that Dr. Devlina had, that can we have mobile desalination plants that go out, reach out to these islands and provide water. I do not disagree with that, but I thought I found a low-tech, more implementable, off the ground in quicker time solution, and we already had these assets. Right? So we are repurposing these assets. So again, I'm addressing water, I'm addressing energy. And I am encouraging people to build enterprises. Right? I'll stop here, 10 o'clock. Thank you.